Owl Live 3, a distance learning adventure brought to you by the USDA Forest Service and the Natural Inquirer. I'm your host, Farah Masumi, and I am a conservation educator for the Forest Service, which manages about 193 million acres of national forests and grasslands throughout the United States. We also work with partnerships with tribal and state governments and private landowners to benefit another 600 million acres, not to mention all the work that we do internationally. Phew, that's a lot. I'm so glad that you could join us today to learn about Woodsy Owl's original slogan, "Give a hoot, don't pollute." Today, we're specifically talking about air and water pollution. If you want to learn more about Woodsy Owl's other mottos, such as lend a hand, care for the land, or open your eyes, be climate wise, we've talked about those ideas in our previous programs in Woodsy Owl Live 1 and 2. So when you're done with this program, you might as well go and check those out too, right? Hint, hint. They're both available on the Natural Inquirer YouTube channel, the new home of all of our FS Nature Live series. Woodsy Owl Live 1 and 2 were about 45-ish minutes long, where we played some videos and answered some viewer questions live. But bear with us because we're doing things a little bit differently for Woodsy Owl Live 3. We also made some videos for this program, but we couldn't wait to play them for you. So they're already up on the Natural Inquirer's YouTube channel. So go find those videos too. There are 3 total. Episode 1 is about the science of air pollution. Episode 2 is about the science of water pollution, and episode 3 is about how you can help prevent both air and water pollution. For example, here's a neat tip. Did you know that you should never flush wet wipes down a toilet, even if they claim to be flushable? They back up our sewer systems and can cost a lot of money to unclog. But anyway, what does that leave for today? Well, today is all about you. We've done enough talking, so we want to hear from you. So feel free to share any questions you have about pollution with us. Just comment in the video while we're live on Natural Inquirer's YouTube channel, and we have some knowledgeable experts standing by who will be happy to answer you. Our experts include Tony Davis, Jesse Scott, and Reese Velez with the Forest Service, and Jessica Nicholson, Brandy McDonald, and Nisa McKinley with the Natural Inquirer. If you see a response from the Natural Inquirer, those are answers coming from our official experts. But our online experts aren't the only folks helping us today. I am very excited to have a couple of scientists with me live to talk about pollution. So let's introduce Sarah Joven and Ryan Binhall. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. So I'm Sarah Jovan, and I am a research ecologist with the Forest Service, and I work at the Pacific Northwest Research Station here in Portland, Oregon.
Fantastic. Great to have you here today. Ryan, would you love to introduce yourself as well?
Of course. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ryan Binhall, and I'm a forester with the USDA Forest Service Northern Research Station, and I'm located in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. So thank you, Farah, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you all. So thanks for joining. So a reminder, we want to know what you viewers, what questions you all have for watching this program. Remember to type them in the comments below. And we do have some questions coming in already. But we'll start with one so we get to know our specialists a little better. So Sarah, can you please explain your job position and what you do?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I'm a research scientist, so I do a lot of research, and pretty specifically, a lot of the work I do focuses on using mosses and lichens to help us learn about pollution and other aspects of air quality. So, I guess in the general sense, the work consists of coming up with study ideas and hypotheses to test, whether they're right or wrong or tell us something useful. And then I get to collect data, which for me often means pulling moss off of trees in cities, which we then grind up and look at what pollutants have accumulated in the moss to help us learn about what pollutants are in the air. And then we analyze those data using statistics and write up a paper, which we then publish about what we found. And so that's just the general process of what the day-to-day is like.
Great, that's so fascinating. Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in your job?
Of course. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm a forester with the U.S. Forest Service. And so what I do is sort of similar to what Sarah does, a little bit different. So what I do is I use trees to clean up contaminated sites. So I use the trees to clean up water and soil pollution. And so I get to study the processes that take place and see what trees are better at taking up different contaminants in the soil and water. And so on a day-to-day basis, I can be out in the trees, and I can be taking measurements, getting my hands dirty a little bit, maybe planting trees. And then it's similar to what Sarah had mentioned too, where I can go back and collect the data and analyze the data and then write papers about what I found. And then I come to these events and help share and spread my work with everybody else.
Great, you both do such important work for our Earth, really. So we have a couple of questions that came in before we started going live. So we have fourth grader Kinley wants to know, does pollution affect animals? So either Sarah or Ryan, you can take that question.
Yeah, that definitely is the case. Pollution can affect animals in different ways, whether it be, for example, for water pollution. Animals can drink the polluted water and they can have health issues. And then in addition, there can also be, if they're drinking the polluted water, let's say, then they might get eaten by another animal, and it can affect multiple animals, not just an animal that's eating the pollution itself. And so it's really important to keep our soils and our water and our air clean so that we can reduce this pollution and hopefully not have these type of health effects that are that the animals are affected by. I don't know if you have anything else, Sarah, that you wanted to add.
That was great. And you even mentioned bioaccumulation, how certain pollutants can accumulate in an animal's body. And then when it's eaten by another animal, that pollution passes on. No, that was great. I guess, you know, I just wanted to say that animals do experience, you know, effects of pollution a lot like humans in some ways. Like animals can get things like asthma, for instance, and cancer and such. So yeah, that was a good question, Kenzie.
And we have another one from the same viewer, Kinley. They also want to know, does pollution create mold?
Kinley, not Kenzie, Kinley. Great questions, Kinley. I actually wanted to respond to that one because more so we think of mold itself as a pollutant. You know, mold is a naturally occurring thing, and there's plenty of mold outdoors. But, you know, when there's too much moisture in our homes, mold tends to grow, and it can be toxic to humans. So it creates different particles that we then inhale, and that can make us sick. So that's also a good question. Mold itself is considered an air pollutant.
Great, thank you. So a special shout out goes to Kathy Michaela's fourth grade class at Wakefield Marancino School in Wakefield, Michigan. We also have some other schools joining us. So thank you so much for joining us. Crescent Elementary, Ironwood Elementary, Pelican Elementary, Sherwood Elementary, and Benton Middle School. We're so excited and happy to have you with us today. So we have a viewer question. So either of you can take this one. Jeannie Collins asks, has anyone looked into the effects or cost of too much grazing by cattle on federal lands? So if you didn't know, federal lands, especially the Forest Service, have a multi-use mission. That means that you can do many things on the land, recreation being one of them, but also folks can graze cattle on federal lands as well. I've seen in spring and fall planted trees trampled by livestock, not to mention the concern of all their feces near many waterways. That can cause an explosion of algal blooms in rivers, lakes, and ponds. Does anyone care about this, or does it just get a pass just because?
I can speak to that a little bit. Now, I just want to say first that I don't study livestock grazing or this sort of land use directly. So there is probably some planning and management and water testing that happens that I wouldn't be aware of. But as someone that studies pollution, including nitrogen, which is one of the main pollutants that is created in manure and causes these algal blooms, I can say that, you know, it is a concern for sure from livestock. I also, so some of the research that I've done using lichens in California, we were finding that high nitrogen levels were impacting lichen communities and starting to cause ecological effects in some of the national parks and national forests there as a result of agriculture in the Central Valley. And, you know, it opens up a bunch of questions about, you know, how do we manage nitrogen? And it's a bigger issue than that. It's not just the grazing livestock on federal lands. For instance, like concentrated feedlots for livestock often create really large amount of nitrogen that you need to try and control. Or, you know, one of the bigger sources that we overlook is actually motor vehicle emissions, which is something that we're all contributing to. So there are a lot of issues there, and you know, yeah, it's a very good question.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Since we're kind of on the topic, can trees release polluted carbon dioxide?
That's a really good question. So, I mean, we usually think of trees as accumulating carbon dioxide and kind of helping us out by reducing, you know, the gases we emit from, you know, cars and other forms of transportation and such. As far as releasing carbon dioxide, I don't really know. I don't think it's the main thing that happens with trees. Do you know more about that, Ryan?
I would say there are ways of releasing carbon. So if, say, a tree dies, it can release its carbon when it dies and decomposes and things like that. For the most part, as you're saying, Sarah, the trees will take in carbon dioxide and act as sort of a sink and take in a lot of the carbon dioxide and clean our air. But there are ways that if trees die, then they can release some of that carbon. So there is carbon can be released when the trees die themselves.
Great. Thank you both so much for such a wonderful answer. Our next question is from fourth graders at Crescent Elementary in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Are the islands of plastic garbage in our oceans getting bigger or smaller?
Unfortunately, the answer to that is they are mostly getting bigger. So there are a lot of reports that we are increasing the number of plastics that are in our ocean. For example, in the Pacific Ocean, we have a very large patch of plastics in our Pacific Ocean that is unfortunately increasing. And so a lot of the times these plastics can come from the land, and they can go in from our waterways, our rivers and streams, and make it into the ocean. And it can go to an area that's called a gyre. So it's the ocean currents can kind of have like a sort of area that the water is very calm there, and the plastic can accumulate there, and it can cause a lot of different effects on the marine life, and can actually break down into microplastics, which are it's very much so an issue that could be taken up and eaten by the marine life, and it can also entangle some of the fish species and some of the other species that are living around these areas. So it's definitely a big concern, and one of the reasons why it's so important to throw away your garbage and make sure that a lot of these plastics don't end up in our oceans, and do things such as recycling in order to try to mitigate and slow the increase of our plastics in our oceans.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it reminds me of another Woodsy Owl saying of reduce, reuse, rot, and recycle. Those are really important to do, and they can really help out not just our waterways, but the entire Earth in general. So Miranda Olson, who asked that question previously about trees and carbon dioxide, has another question. How does air become polluted? Does it just get picked up randomly?
Oh, no, not really. For instance, take for instance, like your car, which is using oxygen and air in the motor for fossil fuel combustion so that the car goes, and you see the tailpipe and you see like more smoky air coming out. There's specific sources that contribute to the pollution out there. Often manufacturing, or maybe cow manures we were just talking about can add gases into the air. Our cars, by combusting oil and gas, it's not really random at all. But maybe part of what you're wondering about is whether there's natural sources of pollution, and indeed there are. For instance, volcanic activity can release some pretty acidic and gross air pollutants, and that's just part of how the Earth functions.
Yeah, thank you so much. So another shout out goes out to Miss Grinnell's 4th grade class in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Thank you again for joining us. We have a question from Wylan from Pelican in Rhinelander. They would like to know if trees are affected by air pollution. That's a great one.
I feel like that's the Ryan one.
I can answer, yeah. So if you do have air pollution, a high level of air pollution, the trees can be affected by air pollution. For example, there is also what we call acid rain. So the air can be polluted to the point that when the rain comes down and hits the trees, it can actually really affect the trees themselves. And so with this acid rain, it's important to have clean air, because with polluted air, sometimes if you have such a high level of pollution in the air, it can interact with the water, and when it comes down as rain, it can affect the trees themselves and negatively impact the trees.
I was just reminded of a study that we done not too long ago, actually, going back to nitrogen again, which I've done a little work on. And it was interesting because, lichens, which is part of my expertise, are some of the most nitrogen sensitive organisms on the Earth. And so just a little bit of nitrogen can cause species to die. So they're often used by federal land managers to help determine when pollution levels might be harmful to some of our nation's protected lands, like wilderness areas and such. But of course, people want to know, like, well, what's the effect on trees? And on some levels, this nitrogen can act as a fertilizer and can increase tree growth, which might seem like a good thing, and maybe is in some respects. But in this study and some other ones since us, we found that it takes a lot more nitrogen to negatively affect trees, but it still can happen. And sometimes that like rapid growth that's kind of out of sync with the environment can cause the trees to become, for instance, like more susceptible to disease or less healthy in some ways. So
I'd like to add one more thing. Sarah's thoughts got me going and got me thinking. And so there's one other thing I wanted to bring up is with air pollution, with high levels of air pollution, sometimes it can affect species quite a bit. And so with things such as mosses and lichens, what Sarah is talking about, some of them can't survive in higher levels of air pollution. And so some of them are what you call bioindicators. So if these species are present, then it means that your air is of good high quality air, and potentially if the species are not present there, then you might have an issue of low quality air. The same thing can happen with water pollution. So there's a lot of aquatic invertebrates that are in the water, some like insects and things like that, that are also bioindicators. So if they are present in the water, then you might have some high quality water. But inversely, if they're not present in the water, you might want to test the water and see if there's possibly some pollution that is causing those species not to be there and not be able to survive in that environment.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it seems like it's very important to keep an eye out on those bioindicator species. So Rachel from Pelican wonders, if an animal eats something with mold, will mold grow inside them?
I don't know. I don't believe so. I really don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know if mold bioaccumulates in the same way that some of these other pollutants do. I feel like the mold, when you eat it, you don't do that. When you do, if it's eaten by an animal, I feel like it can hurt the body, but I feel like the body also processes it and gets rid of it. And it doesn't necessarily hang on to it for a long time. That's my impression. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like I'm also interested in doing research on that topic. So thanks for bringing that up, Rachel. It's always nice to always have the opportunity to learn more. I have another question. So Ryan, in a previous episode, we talked about phytoremediation. Can you give us a recap on what that is and your opinion on why it's important?
Of course, yes. So phytoremediation is the use of plants to clean up water and water and soil pollution. So any plant that you can use, they can actually clean up the soil and the water and help sometimes break down the contaminants. So there's multiple processes that can occur with trees. They can either break it down, they can store it in their tissue, so they can store it in their bark or store it in their leaves. Some trees can also, or some plants can also break down contamination in their roots. And so they use microbes within the soil itself and can break down contamination that way. So trees can be very useful, and phytoremediation itself it is that use of the trees to clean up soils and water. So I think it's extremely important method of cleaning up a contaminated site. Oftentimes we use some other methods, and they're very costly to clean up contamination. But with trees, it's a sustainable green method of cleaning up contamination that we've been testing. My group specifically has been testing at the U.S. Forest Service. So we're very excited to see what phytoremediation can do and how trees can clean up air and water and soil pollution.
Thank you. So Sarah, it was also mentioned in a previous episode that you are studying how much moss and lichen can clean air in urban environments. What are some of your findings so far?
Thanks for asking, because this is my favorite topic. I did just want to start out by saying that if you don't know this already, moss and lichens are these like spongy type organisms. They're different than trees and other plants. They photosynthesize and use the sun for energy, but they don't have roots that help them gather nutrients from the ground and water from the ground. So instead, these organisms behave sort of like little sponges, where they're trapping water and they're trapping nutrients from the air, and that kind of ends up taking up pollutants that happen to co-occur. So if we then look at pollution levels in these organisms, we can get an estimate of what's been happening in that area. And as you may know, we have air instruments for measuring air quality, but they tend to be pretty expensive and logistically difficult. So we use the moss and lichen to give us that finer scaled view of what pollution looks like, which then helps us use those instruments in a more efficient way to learn about air quality. So I guess what I've been learning that's been interesting is recently our research has shown that, at least with the moss species that we've been focusing on here in the Pacific Northwest, and we've been looking at a group of pollutants called heavy metals, and these organisms seem to be aggregating heavy metals from the environment over these pretty long time periods, say more than a year, which is really interesting in the sense that, it's providing this long-term sort of record of what air quality's been in an area, which is very valuable. So if you think about it, if you have, for instance, a pollution source that only emits a little pollution, but often that pollution might not get picked up by our air instruments, but it'll start to add up in the moss over time and bring our attention to the existence of that pollution source. So I could go on for hours, so I'm just going to leave it right there.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So we have another viewer question from Everly from Pelican. They would like to know if air can pollute water or vice versa.
Definitely both. Like nitrogen, especially ammonia from livestock waste, cars, etc., that gets into the waterways can revolatilize as a gas and then become airborne again, and vice versa. Yeah, we tend to kind of look at them as separate, or I'm an air quality person, so I don't know anything about water, but they are, as you said, connected, and that's pretty important. One can become a source of the other for sure.
Yeah, I think that was a very good point by Sarah. They are very interconnected, and what we do, we have to look at the whole broad picture, because there are cycles and the water can release and evaporate and become into the air and become air pollution. Otherwise, the opposite way, yeah, you can have deposition, which is going from the air into the water itself. So we have to take in that whole picture when we're looking at these studies, and we have to understand how some of these cycles work, and realize that we can have pollution from both air and water interacting, and we need to find ways in order to clean up both.
Great, thank you. So I was doing some reading on water science the other day, and I came across the term phototechnology is sometimes used. So what does that mean? Or is it phytotechnology?
It's phytotechnology, Farah. So yeah, I can definitely speak to that. So phytotechnology or phytotechnologies are the use of plants for environmental applications. And so phytoremediation is one of those applications. There's some other different applications that you can use trees for. You can use trees in urban areas. You can use trees to help reduce runoff from coming off the streets and things like that. Termed green infrastructure. You can use trees in a lot of different environmental applications. There's also what you call riparian buffer systems. And so these are where you have trees and other different plants that are planted along streams or riverbanks and help collect some of the runoff and potential pollution that are coming off of agricultural lands. So there's a bunch of different applications that trees can be used for and help us to clean up different contamination and use for environmental applications.
Great, thank you so much. So since we talked a lot about causes of pollution, do you all have any recommendations on what viewers can do to help prevent air or water pollution?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot you can do in terms of both air and water pollution. For example, for air pollution, you can carpool with somebody. It helps to reduce air emissions from vehicles themselves. It also helps with water pollution as well. When you have vehicles that you're driving, some of the gasoline and things might spill into the road and be washed away down into the sewer system or stormwater systems, and that can become water pollution as well. I think there's a lot of other things you can do. There's it's important to also say throw away your trash and make sure it doesn't blow away and potentially wind up into our lakes and our streams. There's other ways, maybe disposing if you're at home and you have some chemicals at home, making sure you understand how to properly dispose of the chemicals so that they don't wind up into our waterways. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to help with both air and water pollution. Sarah, I don't know if you have any other additional advice that people can do.
Those are great suggestions, Ryan. Yeah, I guess just this kind of fits in with what you already said, but one thing I've been trying to practice more and more is just, reusing what I already have and trying to pick something in the first place that is gonna last. There's so many single-use items or just things that come in so much packaging, and that packaging then has its own journey to becoming either recycled or put into a landfill and so on. And so it makes me happy to see there's been a lot more like consumer products coming on the market that have recyclable materials or less packaging, or using a water bottle that is going to last a long time and just filling that up instead of buying water bottles and such. I'm sure most folks have already thought about that, but I think it can make a big difference too.
Fantastic. Yeah, those are all really wonderful recommendations. I know I'll probably start doing a few more of those that you mentioned that I'm not doing already. We have another viewer question from Eliza from Pelican. So they wonder, with so much air pollution, how are trees and plants still able to grow?
I think trees and plants in general are very adaptable species. Like I said, some of them, those bioindicators potentially aren't able to grow in some of these areas, these areas that are polluted by air or have polluted air and polluted water. But with a lot of these trees, sometimes they can actually use some of these pollutants as nutrients themselves, so they can actually take up and use some of these contaminants in order to help them grow. But there are different trees that can and plants themselves that can adapt to those type of environments and be able to survive and sometimes even thrive in areas where there's contamination. But it doesn't lessen the fact that we do want to still be able to create a good environment, that doesn't have much soil, water, and air pollution. So I think it's still very important to help clean up all those different aspects.
I just wanted to add to that kind of building on what Ryan said, that, you know, depending on the pollutant, there are some plants or even lichens that actually like that higher level of pollution and can utilize it, and it kind of upsets the balance of the plant and lichen communities out there, where these usually they're kind of weedy like species that can grow really fast and take up the nitrogen and whatnot, start to like outcompete what the natural flora would have been. So there can be these like cascading effects of pollutants. It's not, again, it's like more just a shift in the balance of the species that are out there. I guess if you put out too much pollution, maybe nothing would grow. It really depends.
Yeah, thank you both so much. So we have another viewer question from Mason at Pelican. They want to know, what are common diseases that affect humans from pollution?
I think the biggest one that I can think of is cancers. So unfortunately, yeah, there are a lot of pollutants out there that are carcinogens, so they can cause cancer, and so that's one of our biggest things that we try to prevent when we're trying to look at cleaning up these different pollutants, because with higher exposure to different contamination, different pollutants, there are a lot of health issues that you can have in addition to cancer. But cancer is one of the biggest, most prevalent disease health issues that people are having. So it's looking at reducing the amount of pollution, and then also trying to see what type of contaminants cause different types of cancers, so that we can best try to clean up those pollutants.
Asthma is another big one that a lot of people can relate to, from particulate matter in the air. Or, I mean, it can get worse than that. There can be neurological or brain issues that arise, or developmental issues. For instance, with like lead is a heavy metal that largely people who study human biology say that there's no safe level of lead in the body. It's just so bad, and especially, you know, for developing children at a young age. So it's actually quite varied what the effects can be.
Great, thank you so much. Are there less toxins released in the air for previous years when you're looking at data?
I would say I would say that we're improving in terms of trying to reduce our pollution in different ways. It depends on how far back you're going. If you're going back a very long way into the past, we are emitting more pollution than we have in the past. But I think there are definitely ways that we're improving on. And for example, things like cars, our car emissions are getting a lot better and a lot stricter standards, and trying to help reduce some of the pollution that is being emitted.
Great, thank you. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, there's been a lot that's been done to help reduce emissions from motor vehicles, which does show up in the data, which are great. Again, it really depends on what pollutants that you're talking about, but I think generally over the last 10 years, numbers have started in some areas to look better, which is great. It shows that, the efforts put forth have been working.
Fantastic. So you both do such amazing and important work for our planet. And I was wondering, what makes your job the most fun?
For me personally, I would say the mixture of different things that I get to do. I get to go outside and I get to get my hands dirty and collect data, plant some trees. I can also go hop on the tractor for a day and till around our plants and things like that. But I can also then come back and analyze our data and get really interested in seeing what's happening with what I'm studying, and that's very interesting to me. So I think just the mixture of different tasks that I can do in a day and getting to meet with different people from all over the world I've gotten to talk to and conduct studies with. So I think it's a really really awesome position that I'm in right now.
Well, I guess I was going to say there's two things that I really enjoy. And one of them is helping people just learn more about what's happening in the environment. For instance, one of my more recent projects was in Seattle, Washington, and it was initiated by the Duwamish River Community Coalition there, who live adjacent to these industrial areas, and they have exceptional levels of asthma and some other issues relative to the rest of Seattle, and see air pollution as a factor, but haven't been able to pin down where and how and whatnot. And so we did a moss study there where we did some mapping of these different heavy metals and have since helped them make some progress towards understanding what those harmful pollutants are. And that was really enjoyable. I guess the downside is, you really don't want to find anything in these studies. You always want to bring good news. But I don't know. I guess just the one other thing is I got into this kind of study initially because I fell in love with moss and lichens, and especially lichens. They're so strange, they're this symbiosis between a fungus and an algae, and they're very just mysterious and bizarre and actually really beautiful. And so my favorite part of the job when I get the opportunity to get outside the city is to roll around in the big mats of moss and lichen and just see what's growing out there, because there's not a ton of people that study them, so there's a lot of mystery still, which I find really fascinating.
Thank you so much for that answer. So we are learning so much today, so thank you everyone. But it looks like we're running out of time. So unfortunately, we're going to wrap things up for today. But don't worry, if we missed your question or if you think of one later, you can always send them to fsconservationeducation@gmail.com. And you don't just have to send us questions either. Feel free to let us know what you thought of this program. We did it a little bit differently than the last one, so let us know if you liked it. We'll call it our little science experiment. I want to thank all our friends who helped us today from the USDA Forest Service and the Natural Inquirer. Let's say farewell to our wonderful panelists today. Sarah, is there anything else you would like to say?
I just wanted to say thank you all so much for tuning in and listening. I just love that you joined us today and that you are concerned about pollution. And, as you continue to do well at school and learn more and more, maybe you'll come up yourself with some really innovative and unique ideas about how to help with pollution. So yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you. And Ryan, do you have any parting words for us?
Yeah, I do. I definitely want to thank you all for coming, and thanks Farah and everyone for having me. I really enjoyed this time, and I hope everybody here got to learn a little bit more about air pollution, about water pollution, and take some ideas away from what we talked about today. And hopefully it kind of sparked your interest, and hopefully you got interested maybe potentially in science. And so I encourage, if you guys have interest in science or looking at pollution, things like that, I encourage you guys to take different courses in science and maybe learn about some of these pollution topics so that you can potentially explore a career in, let's say, the U.S. Forest Service, hopefully. And so, I really appreciated the time here, and hope you guys learned learned something.
Thank you both again so much for participating, and thank you all for watching and asking some wonderful questions. Remember to check out Woodsy Owl Live 1 and 2, as well as the 3 videos in the Woodsy Owl Live 3 series, which are episodes 1, 2, and 3, which talk about air and water pollution. If you're interested in other programs like this one, check them out at fsnaturelive.org. We have programs on climate change, fresh water, grasslands, pollinators, and much, much more. In fact, we have one coming up soon called Moon Trees Live 3. Last year, the Forest Service and NASA launched hundreds of tree seeds in orbit around the moon. The tree seeds came back, and we started growing them in our nurseries. How are they doing, and where will they get planted? Well, find out as we release a new video every Friday in October. Students will be able to talk to scientists live about the project. So blast off and be sure to check that one out. We'll see you then. And in the meantime, remember to give a hoot, don't pollute.